right, good morning. I want to first thank the NAACP for hosting this, and of course, a happy Veterans Day to everyone, especially those who served. My name is Dr. Flojaune Cofer, and I'm running for mayor of Sacramento. I'm the daughter of two public school teachers. My mom taught 8th grade English, and my dad taught 8th grade math. And my parents raised me to value collective work and responsibility. If ever I was frustrated and I started complaining that somebody should do something, I was immediately marched to a mirror and told to repeat that phrase again, because I'm somebody and I should. Losing my dad when I was 11 was what inspired me ultimately to get into public health. My dad wasn't protected by policies. He started smoking during a time where the tobacco industry lied about its harms to our health and heavily and in a predatory fashion marketed to Black communities. He also worked with his father in the steel mills before he went to college, which exposed him to toxins. Had the policies that exist now been there for him, he might still be here today. And yet, during the worst trauma of my own life, losing my dad, I was protected by policies that did exist. I was given grief counseling at my public school, and my mom was able to continue to afford our home on a public school salary, so I was not displaced from the only community I knew during the time I most needed them. My career in public health brought me to Sacramento almost 20 years ago, and I fell in love immediately. Being from the East Coast, it's really hard not to fall in love with the palm trees that are lining some of the streets. And I really enjoyed working at the Department of Public Health, where I built a statewide coalition and led a women's health initiative that decreased infant mortality by 14%. We also had a hand in making sure that all women have access to birth control for free with their health insurance. This city is made up of tight-knit communities with long histories, and it was known as a place that it was affordable and safe for families. But now Sacramento is facing major threats to our health and well-being. Our housing affordability and homelessness crisis is leading the nation, and not in a good way. We're wondering if there's a bright future for us here. We watch in horror as 10,000 people sleep on our streets every night, or in many cases, our very doorsteps. And after 2 years with no youth homicides, our young people began dying on the streets again, and our leadership has proven to be out of touch with the people who live here. They often cite their accomplishments while failing to literally read the room. Sacramentans do not think things are going well because they aren't. We want leadership that listens to us, respects us, and will move our city in a new direction. So I am running for mayor to serve the people. We have a duty, an obligation, a moral one, to solve the affordable housing and homelessness crisis, to protect our climate, and to keep our neighborhoods safe. And that's why I'm not accepting money from corporate PACs, from law enforcement, or from strike busters like Amazon, because I want people to be able to trust that I serve them and not special interests. We can create a city we want to live in together because we know that more is possible. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your Veterans Day Saturday to spend with us. The future of this city is at stake, and your participation means that we have a brighter future because you care. I am here today because I'm running for mayor because I watch the city around me, and I feel like we're moving backwards, and the work that I did is falling apart. I served 8 years on the Sacramento City Council. My name is Steve Hansen, and now as I raise my two boys, I look at them and I think about my childhood where after my parents divorced, they didn't go to college. My dad was a paper recycling plant worker, ended up dying at 53. And because of his union, we had stability, but my mom and I, we moved around 9 times between when I was 3 and when I was 10, when I finally went to live with my father. I saw crime and violence. I saw my mom get beat up. I was beat up by her boyfriends. We'd live in domestic violence shelters and be at soup kitchens. What I come from has shaped me. And as I looked into the future, I wanted to give back because so many people cared about me that didn't have to. They were not relatives necessarily, they were teachers. They were people that saw potential in me. And so I've spent my life in public service, dedicating myself to helping other people. When I enlisted in the Army National Guard, I didn't realize that I could come out and be a gay man. Don't ask, don't tell. Obviously, today's Veterans Day. I saw so many of my friends go off into war, and they didn't come back. I saw the traumas of what happened, and I still feel guilt from having to come out and acknowledge who I am, but because of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, I wasn't allowed to serve with them. So I turned that into a different career, where I came to Sacramento 21 years ago for a one-year job working in state government. Then I was at Equality California as the statewide legislative director, partnering in college with the NAACP, fighting the Aryan Nations in Spokane, Washington, helping to break down systemic racism, working for our Vice President for Diversity. And then coming here at Equality California, I partnered also with NAACP. Not only did Alice Huffman come and help us get our critical vote on our marriage bill, and testified in committee about why it was important, not just to black folks, but to all folks to be treated equally. And then I worked with the NAACP on creating a statewide commission on HIV and AIDS. On the city council, I warned before I ran about homelessness, housing, and crime, the cost of living, and I built more affordable housing in my district than anyone else. I helped reshape our public transit systems to be more effective. We have so much work to do, and right now it feels like we're just going backwards. As we work together in this mayor's race, I hope to have your support, I hope to have your ideas, and I hope you will support me.
Good morning. It's good to see everybody out here on a Veterans Day, and want to acknowledge the veterans, including my younger brother, a 23-year Army Lieutenant Colonel as well, who retired. So, thinking of you, Christopher McCarty. I'm Kevin McCarty. Some of you may know me as your assembly member. I love my job representing you. I've been at the state capitol. This is my 10th year, fighting for Sacramento. Fighting for racial justice, fighting for education for all, leading on issues when they were unpopular. But you know what I love more than serving you as your assembly member? My city of Sacramento. I am Sacramento. My parents, literally when they met, lived 2 blocks from here on 42nd Street in a little apartment. We lived about a dozen places throughout my life throughout Sacramento. I am Sacramento. So I want to talk about my values, who I am, my work, and why I'm deciding to leave this position and run for mayor. But before we get there, I know I haven't paid recently, and I've been asked to pay, but I want you to know that I'm a lifetime member. So we'll go back and we'll get that receipt and show you that I paid my lifetime membership in the mid-2000s. I think it was $700, so I paid that forward. So look, I am a product of Sacramento. I benefited from government. I, like Mr. Hansen's story, my mom, single mom, benefited from after-school programs, child care, free lunch, subsidized health care, college scholarships that gave her an opportunity to make the best of her and kept my brother and I out of trouble. So I know that government can make a difference. That's why I'm running, to continue my quest for public service and give back to our community. I've served in the city council for a decade. I've served in the legislature. I know how to get things done and be a practical problem solver for the people of Sacramento. I've led on issues when they were unpopular. My first day in the legislature, I introduced a bill on independent investigations for police shootings. The sponsor of my bill was the NAACP. That bill died 5 times before it became law after the summer of George Floyd. So I've led and leaned in on issues when nobody else did, when they were hard, when they were unpopular. That's my values. Some of you may not know my background. Biracial African-American kid. My grandpa came from Louisiana and Jim Crow in the early 1900s, instilled the values of why I think government can make a difference and ought to make a difference to help people rise above. I know Sacramento has a lot of problems, a lot of challenges, but I also see it. We have a glass half full city. We have a collection of diverse neighborhoods, diverse people, groups like the NAACP. So I'm going to lean in and use my problem-solving skills to tackle things like housing affordability. Is that done? Red? Or 30 seconds? 10 seconds. and make sure we need to walk and chew gum at the same time. Look forward to talking to you about my issues with housing and homelessness, as well as tackling other key issues throughout the city of Sacramento.
All right, now that we've heard from the candidates, we will begin with questions. Again. Cross-jurisdictional challenges often require a unified approach. What strategies do you have in place to work with the Board of Supervisors on issues like homelessness and public health?
Well, first of all, we are not in this alone. We are all in this together to solve the issues like homelessness and housing. So I think we ought to realize that we're not going to solve this problem with just the city of Sacramento. It becomes the city, the county, the state, even the federal government tackling these biggest problems. One thing that I'm doing is leading today. I think some of the issues are city issues, and some of the issues we can lead at the state level. I'm currently authoring legislation that would have us as a joint city-county JPA to address homelessness. It's not just Sacramento's problem. It's not just the city's problem. All jurisdictions are in this together. Whether they're Rancho Cordova, Elk Grove, the county, or the city, we need to pool our resources together and think strategically how we can tackle these issues today. I don't think that by pointing fingers and bringing lawsuits against other jurisdictions are going to solve problems. We all need to work on these things together. I have a great history of working with others to bring about common sense solutions. Working with the county, working with my legislators in the State House, as a council member, working with my colleagues, because one person can't do this alone. I don't support the strong mayor measure of government, because I think that we all need to work on these issues together. One thing that I would note is that there's great frustration in getting things across the finish line. I don't always think it's a money problem. One thing that pointed out is, as a legislator, I was able to answer the call to get money to the county of Sacramento to develop housing to get people off the American River Parkway. I got an earmark in the budget last year of $25 million after the county asked for 10. I said, hey, here's 25. Whatever you were going to do, let's double it. Well, 17 months later, they haven't spent a penny of that. So what does that mean? It's not always money. It's leadership and urgency. And as a mayor of Sacramento, I'm going to work to bringing all parties together to tackle our critical issues.
Dr. Cofer?
Why is it that we are living in the capital of the richest state on the planet and we have people sleeping on our streets? Why? I'm really frustrated because we often hear about all the things that have been done, and yet anybody who has been in elected leadership for the last 10 years has overseen the growth in homelessness from 2,500 people in 2013 to 10,000 people, the majority of whom are unsheltered in 2023. So what we're talking about now is the need to go beyond JPAs, where you still have less than a quorum of every single body coming together so nobody can make decisions, and actually have a joint meeting between the city and the county to set goals and to allocate resources to do that. And I know it's possible because as a committee chair for Measure U, I realized we had the budget for the police department and the Police Review Commission was working on policy, and so I said we should have a joint meeting because we had issues of mutual interest. The people who do this full time, not as a volunteer like me, should have already gotten there. This is not rocket science. And I think the challenge for me is that there's been a lot of talk about what we could do and what we should do, but not a lot of action, and people are literally sleeping on our streets. Past leadership has very much been us versus them. It's been people looking for what's their next move going to be, opening up committees 4 years before they're going to run for offices, thinking about what this strategic move is. I love my job. I like where I'm working right now. I'm not running for mayor because I need a soft place to land. I'm running for mayor because we need actual answers to the challenges facing the community we all live in and love. And those answers have policy solutions. Those answers require leadership from the people to step out and say, this is what we need right now, not later, to follow up when money has been allocated and it's not being used. These are the things that we need in our community right now, and you need a mayor who will fight for you because they understand the fierce urgency of now, and I am that mayor. I collaborate because I'm a public health professional, and we have lots of responsibility. Oh, okay, thank you.
People are tired of people in government fighting, whether it's on the city council with each other, whether it's the city with the county, the school district fighting with other people. We have to stop fighting. We have to get back to working together. And evidence-based solutions, things that we can show if we invest your precious tax dollars into something, it actually saves people's lives. It helps them get off the streets. I will say that if you look at our county right now, they have turned a corner in trying to work on homelessness. And that is their job. Under the structure of government, they have human services, social services, public health, and that's what tax dollars go to them for. The city has to be a good partner to them and not try to do their job for them. How do we complement that? We have not opened enough shelters. The county has just recently, and I want to give them credit, they opened a tiny home village. Even Supervisor Kennedy stayed the night there to experience what other people experience. I bought 40 pallet homes while I was on the council in 2020, and before I left, we could not get them deployed. They're still sitting in a courtyard waiting to be used. That is an example of many. When I came to the city council, having been homeless as a kid, I helped start our first programs because before I got elected, we didn't have one staff person in the city whose job was to coordinate with the nonprofit community, with the healthcare community, with the county, with the school districts on this very issue. While cross-jurisdictional challenges exist, we have many examples of success beyond homelessness. If you look at our JPAs on transit, on air quality, we have a model for partnership. And I think rather than creating new forms of government, new types of government, we just have to get back to doing our job and working together.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hansen. The second question will start off with Dr. Cofer, and it is, what steps have you taken or do you plan to take to reduce the systemic inequalities in our criminal justice system that disproportionately affect African Americans and other people of color?
I love this question. As a public health professional, I've been working on addressing disparities my entire career. And among those, we understand that our criminal justice system is one of those systems where these disparities are often greatest. And so I've been working on things like a public health approach to revamping our cash bail system and addressing substance use as a public health problem. Long before the opioid crisis started getting into other communities, when it was primarily the Black community that was affected and it was criminalized. And also, transforming the 911 system so it's more efficient and responsive and effective. And so we talk a lot about, what the county is doing well, and certainly there are things the county is doing well. But just this past December, the county made a major move that puts us all in danger. And that was approving a $1 billion expansion to our jail system. Because the majority of the people who are in our jail are released within 10 days, and so it is ineffective and inefficient to put mental health services in the jail and not expand them in an outpatient opportunity. We have needs in our community, and if your only tool is a hammer, every problem starts to look like a nail, and we keep trying to criminalize our way out of other issues that we have a responsibility to take care of. So I'm concerned that we are shoveling all of our unhoused neighbors into our jail. The disproportionate number of them are our Black neighbors. And then we are releasing them at 2 o'clock in the morning without so much as a bus pass, and wondering why downtown is littered with more people who are sleeping on our streets. And so when we use the criminal justice system as our tool, we disproportionately harm Black people. And I want us to use our monies in ways that don't cut our nose to spite our face, ways that are preventive and that will allow us to move our community forward.
Community violence is a reflection of many different things. The social determinants of health is when you go upstream and find out whether it's the lack of sufficient educational opportunities, the lack of sufficient economic opportunities, and there's no doubt our communities of color have suffered from historic discrimination, systemic bias that have deprived people of some of the economic and social things that other people take for granted. And I think when we talk about this question, it's twofold. We have a job of protecting as a city the people in our neighborhoods, the people who are working in businesses from violence and crime. That's only a piece of it, though. We've got to get upstream and invest in our communities through partnerships. On the policing side, I did help reform our use of force policy. I ensured that we had body-worn cameras. We did implicit bias training. We did de-escalation training. But that wasn't enough. I also helped champion the ceasefire program to help move CBOs into a place where they could intervene so that violence and being part of gangs weren't the only thing. We invested in youth programs, and I think as we look at the future of the city, those are preventative to an extent, but if we don't create economic opportunity by really creating more housing, so housing is affordable to families and not a disproportionate burden, unless we reduce the barriers to entrepreneurship. And in the Black community, we have tremendous entrepreneurs who want to create businesses, who want to create opportunity for others, who want to hire. And the city needs to be a good partner through a program to reinstitute our small business preference program for minority-owned businesses, through hiring, through all these things. And I think that if we really want to improve community violence, it's going to have to be an all of the above strategy.
Oh, thank you. I think there was a question about criminal justice and police reform and my work and my vision. So this has been my body of work in my term in the legislature. In 2019, I was named the NAACP Co-Person of the Year with Dr. Shirley Weber because we led in and wrote the use of force bill after the great tragedy in South Sacramento where Stephon Clark lost his life. So it's not just some platform for me running for mayor in 2023-24, it's my work the past decade. I wrote the law to reform our Sheriff Oversight Committee when our sheriff here locked the door on the oversight. I worked to make sure that our Attorney General can do independent police investigations for officer-involved shootings. On criminal justice reform, my big focus is be successfully reintegrating people into society after they get out of the justice system, so not a statistic. I wrote the law that says ban the box when you apply for jobs. I made it sure that community college students can participate when you're in the criminal justice system. I worked to make sure that people have the right to vote after incarceration, an old relic of the Jim Crow law. So this is not my vision today, it's my work that I've done for the past 10 years, and I'm proud of my work. What does that mean? How I will govern as mayor of Sacramento? You determine the future by your past. It's not just some platform today, it's my values. So as mayor, I will clearly lean in on police accountability. Not all police officers cross the line, but when they do, they need to be held accountable. I think that we need to expand opportunities for youth. Because when I say if you want fewer people in prison, you want more preschoolers to make sure that Sacramento implements universal preschool and after-school programs to keep kids out of trouble, out of the juvenile justice system. I think it's a tragedy what happens with young people and guns. So I am helping fund the Brother to Brother program and working with our police chief to bring about mentoring for people arrested for gun crimes before they get in more trouble. Lastly, on public policy, I think justice. You're strong.
You can wrap up the statement. Oh, good. Mr. McCarty, you can wrap up your statement. You good? All right. Question number 3, we'll start off with Mr. Hansen. Youth activism has been on the rise in Sacramento. How has this movement shaped your campaign priorities, and what initiatives do you have planned to support young activists in Sacramento?
Thank you for the question. The city has tried very hard, and during my time on the council, and I want to continue, to reshape our city commissions so that there's a youth voice on every commission. We do have a youth commission made up of people under 21 who are a strong voice, but how do we continue to bring that in policy? We even have folks from our youth organization sitting in the front 2 rows over here thinking about how they, for their forum, are going to carry their voices forward. And I think, I'm in my 40s now, so I'm not young anymore. But as I look at my kids, I want to make sure that, particularly for youth, we have sufficient daycare so that women and parents have access to the resources they need so their kids can thrive. And from early childhood on, the city has a role. Our youth initiatives, whether it's through the Department of Youth, Parks, and Community Enrichment, have to be prioritized in our budget. And Measure L, which passed last year, helps to create some funding mechanisms so that we're putting our money where our mouth is. When I was on the council, we funded the pop-ups on Friday and Saturday nights. Funding irregular programming through CBOs that are living hand to mouth is not sufficient to giving youth opportunities. We have to create systemic reform so that we have ongoing funding for those very programs. Look, I don't claim to have all the answers. I want youth to tell us what they want. It's more than our parks. It's more than Parks and Rec. But in our disadvantaged communities especially, our youth need a lot more. And they need that engagement, that cross-functional engagement we were talking about with the county on homelessness. Because every level of government, whether it's the school district, the city, the county, the state, and the federal government, we have a role. And we can make youth lives better and open up their economic opportunity and their future by listening to them.
Yeah, so the question's about youth activism, but I think the bigger question and the bigger issues, we need to always remember that youth represent 50% of the present and 100% of the future. So all of our policies need to be remembering the future, our youth. Yeah, I think we should expand government to make sure that we have a voice on these city boards. I think there's a debate right now at City Council, putting a young person on the City Council to be able to debate up there. I'm not sure that's the right idea, but I do like the notion of having a young person on every city commission. But more importantly, we need to invest in our youth. When I was a young council member, I used to get the calls from the police chief saying something bad happened. One night he called me and said a young teenage girl, 15, was shot in the face in front of the George Sim Community Center on a Saturday night at 7 p.m. I went out there the next week and I saw the sign at the door and it says, they're closed every Friday and Saturday night. I'm like, what if we opened them up? So I created this program 15 years ago, which is now today, called the Hotspot Program, where we open up community centers on Friday and Saturday nights to let young people do something productive as opposed to looking for negative alternatives. We need to make sure that we invest in our young people. One of my strengths as a former lawmaker is I'll be able to help bring down state resources to Sacramento. Two of the laws that I created recently are universal preschool in California and universal after-school programs. Well, those aren't going to work unless we have providers and entities ready to step up to the challenge. So one of my first acts I will do is bring about a coalition of providers, after-school networks, nonprofits to focus on how we can draw down those state resources to make sure every young person has an opportunity to succeed, like I did, like when my mom was going to school at night and working full-time. We had programs that kept us out of trouble. I want to make sure that the city that helped me provides the same opportunities for the youth of today and tomorrow.
The young people in our community are certainly facing challenges in the future, but they're also facing challenges right now. This is a generation that none of us can really relate to because we were adults with fully formed social networks and lives when COVID hit us. We were managing this without the benefit of social media for good or for bad. Like, we have to acknowledge that we are ill-equipped for many of the changes that have come about, and our young people are suffering, and we're trying to tell them to do stuff that, I hear you when you say you people are from the 1900s. Like, this doesn't work for us, okay? As insulted as I am by it, it's true. And so part of the reason why I was so in favor Measure G when it was defeated in 2020, and then what became Measure L, which passed, thankfully, was because so often when it comes to our budgets, young people are an afterthought. Because they literally don't vote, we don't value their voices. That's why I've championed all of our boards, committees, and commissions having a youth voice. I think it's a great idea for us to have a youth member on the council who's not voting, but gets to represent the interests of the people who live in this community. I think that's our responsibility. You know, I think a lot about the people of Washington, D.C., who also talk about taxation without representation. Young people pay taxes, and they don't have an elected representative. And so why wouldn't we take the steps to make sure that their voices are embedded? I also think that, you know, from my campaign, you know, Sunrise has been actively involved. You know, we are engaging young people in my campaign. They're working on it. They're out knocking doors. I'm going and talking to high schools. Last night, I thanked Larry Lee and wished the Observer well for the 60th anniversary. But I was at Grand High School because they're in the playoffs and they deserve our support. And boy, 76-6, that was wild. That game was a blowout. But that's the kind of thing that young people want to see, is us showing up for them and us allowing their voices and their leadership to show. And that's me remembering being a young person and also understanding that leadership has to be adaptive in order for it to be effective.
Question 4 is going to be first spoken on by Mr. McCarty, Assemblyman McCarty. Community violence is a pressing concern that disproportionately impacts Black communities. What initiatives do you propose to reduce violence and promote community safety?
Yes, so it's a tragedy that we have young people that get the calls. I have kids in high school. They're freshmen in high school up the road here at McClatchy. And a few weeks ago, a young kid brought a gun to school. And we got the call, parents were worried. But I wonder, why does that kid have to bring a gun to school in the first place? And what are we doing to intervene? So one thing that I'm working on right now as your assembly member is working with Brother to Brother and the police chief on this great idea. You know, when an individual goes and gets a DUI, they have to go to DUI school. What if a young person gets arrested with a gun? They have to go to gun violence school and the gun education school. So making sure that young people who are engaged early on have a chance to turn a different direction. Last year, I worked to co-author the bill that taxes firearm production in California. That's going to generate $150 million a year. I want to make sure Sacramento gets our fair share of that money to fund effective gun violence prevention programs. It's a public health epidemic, gun violence. It's a leading cause of death for young people. It's not needed. We are a very unique city and country in the world on this issue. It shouldn't have to be this way. So California and Sacramento need to continue to stepping up. We need to show leadership and continue to look for creative, innovative ideas to tackle gun violence.
So for this question, I think a lot about the city we live in. And I'm glad ceasefire was mentioned, because ceasefire was the first time that we saw a major decline in Sacramento in gun violence deaths among young people. And what did? We did away with the program. And then a few years ago, we had 2 full years with no youth homicides from the end of 2017 until the beginning of 2020. And instead of there being banners hung from City Hall and everybody celebrating this, right when the pandemic hit, and when the known drivers of violence were going up, when we had the unprecedented experiences of our schools being shut down and our businesses being shut down, all the things that we know are going to drive up violence, we decided to take away funding and disband the network of programs that got us 2 years with no young people dying, 2 years with no RIP on the fences of our schools, 2 years with no young people crying over graves. So we don't have to look to some Nordic countries or some other far-off place. We can just simply look right here in Sacramento and say, let's stop doing away with things that work. So my commitment here is pretty simple. I'm going to take us back to what works, because it works.
when ceasefire ended, we brought in advanced peace. And that was very controversial. And I made the motion on advanced peace because there was a lot of controversy as to whether that program would make a meaningful difference. And we saw with the intervention, and I mentioned it earlier, not just from ceasefire, but advanced peace, that you could change lives, reduce community violence, and have better outcomes. Councilmember Jennings, when he joined the council in 2014, he created a gang prevention task force. And that wasn't just law enforcement, that was community organizations, Roberts Family Development Center, the Urban League, you name it. People were at the table. And we funded, along with the county, significant interventions so that young people had alternatives, but also so that victims had a voice. Not everybody who's been the victim of a crime wants to see the worst possible outcome for that offender. They want them to get better. They want to acknowledge their role, and that's restorative justice. And I think these efforts towards restorative justice have to acknowledge that victims have a role, that communities have a role, and that together we actually get better. But if we accept bad behavior and we're not doing these interventions to get upstream, then we're gonna have to rely more and more on the things that don't work as well, which is using law enforcement at the point of a crime. I do believe that one of the biggest things that we lost out on was when the federal government cut funding for community-oriented policing. We used to embed officers in communities so that there was relationships between the community and those people. We don't really do that anymore. Once that funding got cut, so people are coming from all over the community and they don't really know the community that they're coming into. I think we have to rebuild some of those bridges. And there are people in this room have been at the friction points of these issues. And so we have to listen to what the community's ideas are as well to get us back into a place where we talk to one another and make each other better.
Thank you, Mr. Hanson. All right, question 5, we're going to start off with Dr. Cofer. How will you approach police reform and accountability with public safety?
Yeah, this is a problem that we have been facing in the city of Sacramento, and it is so bad that it's showing up in our budget as a budget consideration, that we have had to pay out settlements. We didn't name who, but it certainly isn't the Parks Department. So we need to start having a conversation, an honest conversation with ourselves, because we have an Office of Public Safety Accountability and an Inspector General. We also have a Police Review Commission. And quite frankly, our police department has not played nice in the sandbox with any of them. And some people will criticize the Police Review Commission and say, well, they're too aggressive. But our Office of Public Safety Director, Dr. Letitia Watson, is a Black woman and a former police chief. If you can't work with a police chief, the problem isn't everybody else, the problem is you. And so our department is not working well with the people they should be, period. And so we have some real challenges. And the two issues that our city is facing are who shows up and what happens when they do. And so I point to the example of Los Angeles Police Department Union, the largest union in our state, who in March said there are 28 call types that they should not be responding to. And they're mostly calls relating to homelessness and mental health and other things that they've admitted they don't need to be a part of. And so if they can do it, we could certainly do it here. And it was on the agenda for our city council and voted down 6-3 this year. So those are the types of things that we need to change. And then we need to talk about what happens when people show up. We don't show up with a gun when grandma had a heart attack. That's not the way that we should show up in our community. And so when we do, we actually divert the police away from the role they're supposed to be playing, which is solving violent crimes and doing those things. That's supposed to be their role. And so when we don't do this, it affects our entire community. So what I'm talking about is budget realignment. What I'm talking about is role adjustment. What I'm talking about is creating a city where we actually do things that work and that keep us safe. We don't give lip service to safety because we've made it synonymous with policing.
Thank you very much.
The progress or lack thereof that we've made in police reform as a city is also reflective of a lot of the challenges we faced as a county and as a state. The city has tried to be at the forefront, whether it's when I worked with Councilmember Carr in implementing Campaign Zero, which is the idea that using evidence-based interventions, you reduce those opportunities where law enforcement and the public have a negative interaction that leads to injury or death. And that's where the use of force policy reforms came from. That's where some of the other things related to body-worn cameras and everything else came from. We have to continue to use evidence-based interventions. If the Public Safety, the Police Accountability Commission needs reform, then we should have an honest conversation about what's going to get us to a better place. Same with OPSA, or Nicole Clavo now looks at these issues too from her experience having lost her son, JJ, to violence. She's a city staffer on this. I don't think that there's going to be one answer alone that rebuilds the trust between communities of color or the community in general and people worried about the misuse of the power that law enforcement has. But I do believe that we can continue to make progress on these things if we work together. And the Department of Community Response, which was created while I was on the council during the summer of George Floyd, was an opportunity to begin to shift away some of those calls that Dr. Flo mentioned, but it has been primarily tasked with dealing with homelessness. I think if we're serious about these issues, while I'm mayor, we're going to refocus the department on getting upstream to make sure that fewer of those calls end up in the hands of law enforcement and with a better, clinically appropriate, evidence-based solution.
So as mayor, I'm going to lean in on police reform, and not just because I'm running for mayor today in 2023-24. That's what I've done for 19 years. I've had 6 big elections in the last 19 years, and the police union has gone against me every one. And I've won every election. Not this last one, but we're on our way. I've never received their endorsements nor contributions for them because I've stood up on issues like racial profiling when that was the issue. Then I stood up on making sure we bring accountability to law enforcement through independent investigations for officer-involved shooting policies. And I agree with Dr. Flo about the accountability for what we pay. Do you think that if all the public knew how much we pay out in police settlements, that they would be okay with what we're doing? No. So that's why I have a bill that's going to the governor's desk in two months that's going to state that we shouldn't have to all of us have some be reporter report it. It should be always present to make sure that we demand accountability on these issues, to make sure we can lean in. So look, I think that we can adequately fund our police department and have police accountability. I think that officers genuinely do a good job, but when they cross the line, there needs to be accountability. I think we need to have transparent policies as far as reforms we're doing with de-escalation, what we're doing with officer-involved training, what we're doing to make sure that community policing does reflect the work that we want to focus on in our community. But it's really based upon our values, and as mayor, I will be someone that won't shy away from this issue and can lean in as I've done for my entire elected career.
Okay, so we're going to question 6 here, and I'm going to softly apologize and warn you that this will be a question that you have not seen. The reason for that is because our original question 6, frankly, each of the candidates have done a good job of discussing their engagement with civil rights organizations and local organizations that address issues and benefits of the Black community. So instead of giving them a question, frankly, that most of them have been answering to some degree, I'm going to give them a question that's very in the heart of the African American community. So in January of this year, Mayor Steinberg announced a pilot supporting reparations for Black Americans. Please comment on that pilot and how you would support reparations for Black Americans. This is Hanson's first.
Thank you for the question. The state's been moving aggressively through the reparations task force, and hopefully you've all seen those reports and the debate that's going on there. As I mentioned earlier, the systemic racism and discrimination that's affected particularly Black communities. You see it through redlining, you see it through the, okay.
Because this is an unexpected question, I'm giving them an additional 30 seconds to respond.
Oh, okay, got it. Because of the disproportionate impact on Black people, that generations, hundreds of years of discrimination have taken a toll. People's homes have been taken, their lives have been taken, they've suffered through systemic discrimination. We have to find ways, using the city appropriately, to uplift folks. Black women in particular bear a unique burden that we have to look at how we lift them up and remove some of those burdens from their shoulders, while we also look at young people of color. And that's where I think the mayor, in looking at this, probably wants to get us to things like basic income programs where we can help people who are already disenfranchised economically. But I would like to pivot us into how do we help people open businesses through seed money. During the pandemic, I helped make sure that our arts community got grants. Individual artists could get grants directly without having proven that they had lost income, and that disproportionately helped our Black artists. We have to look at housing. We have to look at how we make housing affordable by building enough housing across the city that can help uplift those same families. There are going to be a million ways we can use our hiring process, our procurement processes, to give folks who have been systemically disadvantaged a chance at new opportunities and set a new standard for how cities, not just in California but beyond, can look at the power of government from the bottom up to create justice and to heal some historic wrongs.
You want to repeat the question?
All right. Again, in January, well, McCarty has it this year.
Yeah.
Okay. In January of this year, Mayor Steinberg announced a pilot supporting reparations for Black Americans. Please comment on that pilot and how you would support reparations for African Americans.
Yeah, I support the mayor leaning in on reparations. This is a very hot topic in California. I'm intimately involved as a member of the Legislative Black Caucus. I'll be authoring 3 bills this year to implement the 1,000-page reparations task force. And I think the most important thing is having a conversation with the people of California and Sacramento to focus on the systemic impacts of racism and slavery 404 years after Jamestown. That we need to realize that the impacts are still there today. Redlining in neighborhoods like these exists. That's why I wrote the bill a couple years ago to focus on those racial covenants and how they scar people to this day. I'm going to be authoring, I know I'm running for mayor, but I'm actually walking and chewing gum at the same time. I'm working as an assembly member today for you, authoring a bill that is going to give cash for descendants of slavery to go to get career education, to making sure we expand higher education and college in the justice system to help people when this disproportionately impacts African Americans. We know that. There is a plethora of bills I'll be leaning in on today. And this is going to be a very hot topic. It's not about sending people checks and saying, I'm sorry. It's about public policy that we can do at all levels of government to be able to make a difference and acknowledge the 400+ year impact. The city of Sacramento has a role. I don't know what that is yet. I think mainly it's a state effort right now, but I support what the mayor is doing, looking at ways to engage. Most importantly, what he's doing is ripping the Band-Aid off and telling the public, yes, I support this issue. We need to lean in, and I'll work with groups like the NAACP and others to focus on how the city of Sacramento could implement policies. I like the idea that Mr. Hansen said earlier about licenses. One thing that we did recently for cannabis licenses is give a handout to people who are impacted by the war on drugs. It hasn't been super effective, but I like the concept of giving people engagement and opportunity who have been systemically impacted by our policies. And I'll be leaning in on this issue as mayor of Sacramento.
appreciate all the good ideas that we heard up here and certainly the work that's happening at the legislature. In terms of the city, this is a challenge that I do think we're prepared to take head on, and I think that there's been ample groundwork already done for this for the city. The best opportunity for us is the cannabis, or which is this gentrified name, the marijuana tax revenue, because I'm gonna call it what it was criminalized under. So it's the marijuana tax revenue. And that tax revenue is coming in right now. And I work for an organization that put together the report showing that Sacramento has the dubious distinction of having the highest disparity in racial differences in terms of who was criminalized for marijuana. Now, what we know is that it's the one thing that unites Americans. Across racial and ethnic groups, we all use weed at about the same amount. But when it came to who was criminalized for it, 29 times in Sacramento, which is way higher than the state average, which was somewhere between 4 and 7. So we have a responsibility here in Sacramento to do right because we were the most wrong. And that revenue that's coming in is mostly coming in not from core recipients, but from businesses that have been in existence already. And so we have an opportunity here to do something called participatory budgeting, to actually go to where on the map those communities were harmed and offer the money. Again, how do I know we can do it? Because we did it on the Measure U committee. We did it with only $1 million, but we were offering it to communities and said, what are the projects you want to have? And then they got to vote on them themselves, and then that became a part of this community. And there is nothing stopping us from approaching our marijuana money in the same way. Because the thing I don't want to see happen is for us to have to spend years studying this 100 years from now because we didn't do right while people are still alive right now who were criminalized. Because we're setting ourselves up to be in the same position. 100 years from now, the mayoral candidates will be sitting here saying, you know, we did wrong with the war on drugs and we just don't know what to do. And so we're gonna spend 3 years studying it and then we're gonna come up because we can't give you cash anymore because those people aren't around. Let's do it now while people are still alive and while we have the opportunity, and let's continue to do it anytime we recognize that something has not worked well and that it's systematically harmed a community. That's the way to go. Don't wait.
All right, next question, Assemblyman McCarty is going to lead on this one. Considering the importance of healthcare, share your position on CalCare, and please detail your plans for expanding access to medical services in Sacramento for underserved communities.
Yeah, thank you. CalCare, for those of you who don't know, is universal health care or single payer. The city of Sacramento and the mayor can't implement that, has nothing to do with the implementation, but you know who does? The state legislature, and I've been a co-author of the bill 3 times and been on the hit list of the people who don't like that every time, because I think healthcare is a human right. It's the #1 reason people file for bankruptcy. It's a bigger issue about people are actually homeless. It has a major impact on society. And we've seen that the costs of healthcare impact school districts. It was the driver why there was a teacher strike, healthcare. It's the biggest issue on some of these labor beefs as well, healthcare. It's the issue why small businesses are continuing to pay premiums up and up through the roof, healthcare. So I think it's a moral imperative that we take out the waste in the healthcare system. HMOs, the pharmaceutical industry, other entities that are taking it out from direct care to people in the community healthcare. So in my last year of the legislature, I will once again co-authored the bill to have single-payer universal health care in California. But as mayor, we have nothing to do with implementing that. We don't run healthcare, but we can be is a voice, and I would make sure that Sacramento leans in and supports that policy. But what we can do is making sure that we do have healthcare programs today. Obamacare, the exchange, isn't perfect. We have like 90% participation in healthcare today because of Obamacare, thanks to President Obama. What the city can do a better job, which we launched this week with Covered California, is going to our youth programs, our community fairs, every aspect of city government to make sure that people know about opportunities to get subsidized health care. Because we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good and all kinds of issues of government. But one thing specifically that we can lean in is help connect the people of Sacramento to healthcare options. But as far as CalCare, universal healthcare, in my final year of the legislature, I will once again lean in and be a co-author of that bill.
So this is an issue where I've actually been supportive of a lot of Assemblymember McCarty's work, and so I am a long-term supporter of CalCare. I've worked with the nurses on this bill repeatedly, and have emphasized the importance of it for many of the reasons that Assemblymember McCarty already named, that a lot of people living on the streets are there because a health care cost caused them not to be able to work and then caused them to lose their health insurance, or the costs that they were incurring were just so prohibitive that it put them in bankruptcy. I think it is the number one issue that our small businesses are facing, is the lack of CalCare is hampering the growth of our small businesses. And so I think that needs to be said more, because often this is, couched as an issue that does not affect all of us, but it really would be a boon to our entire economy. And it would really be a way to be able to extend the number of years in our life and the amount of life in our years. As mayor, I think that we need to be much more proactive in emphasizing to our state leaders the importance of having single-payer health care. Because I've seen this bill die without a vote because we are a single-party state, unfortunately, and people don't want to be on the record voting against it. And so we actually need to be able to be championing this from the perspective of our cities and saying, this is our top priority because of the way that it impacts the people who live in cities. And that's the leadership that I will bring as mayor. I also want to make sure that we are working best with our healthcare plans and also with our county, once again, because they are responsible for so much of the health and human services in the city of Sacramento. And so there are ways. We now will have undocumented people who are going to be eligible for healthcare next year. And so we need to be doing outreach in all of the languages that are spoken in Sacramento to make sure that people are able to access their care. And that is a responsibility of the city. And so part of what I want us to really be able to beef up here is our community engagement. People in our community should know what's happening. They should be able to easily access it. It should not be hidden behind some veil and then only posted in an agenda 5 days beforehand. We should be able to be active participants in our community. And this is an example where if the entire city of Sacramento, that's our state legislature, if we all came together and said our top issue, and we're not leaving until you pass CalCare, we could get some real momentum here. And so I think we need some leadership to light our fire and say, this is a top priority. We just lived through a global pandemic and we haven't figured out that it's a bad idea to tie our health insurance to our jobs. Like, we can do better.
In the late 90s, when there wasn't sufficient access to care in our community, Mayor Cerna created Sacramento Covered, which was one of the first programs where the city, and then ultimately spun off as a nonprofit, which is now Community Health Works, acknowledged the healthcare disparities in our community. We do have a role to play here. I worked in healthcare for quite a long time. I served on the board of an FQHC, a federally qualified health center, now called One Community Health, for 6 years. The state government, the federal government, they fund healthcare organizations in our community. They fund the county to do this work. And there are some transformational programs going on right now. I do think ultimately a single payer system is the right system. The city is not going to make that manifest if all the other powers that be haven't been able to do that. We have to work with what we have, and what we have is a fragmented system where people don't have adequate transit to get to the healthcare facilities in their district. So we have to make sure that there's more transportation options, that there are more clinics in more neighborhoods. And I'm very proud to have the support of WellSpace, which is our largest community clinic provider in the region. Their medical director, Janine Barra, is a supporter of mine, and we've been talking about how we fill those gaps. Because as much as I would like to wave my magic wand and fix all this stuff, the city's got a lot of different things going on, and we have to work with the healthcare systems that we have. You know, the Morse Avenue Hospital was supposed to be replaced 10 years ago. We still need that new Kaiser Hospital in the rail yards. We still need more access to primary care, which is really hard to get into right now. Medicaid, which in California is called Medi-Cal, is going through a transformation through a program called CalAIM. CalAIM can now pay for housing and other things that help you beyond just direct medical care to get better, to be stable, to get off the streets, and to keep your kids healthy. Both of my kids, we foster adopted. I think about those kids that aren't as lucky to have a home or families that can provide for them. And when we look at whether it's a question about youth, whether it's a question about systemic racism, there is no doubt that healthcare disparities for communities of color in our city are huge, and by doing some of these things, we can make it better.
Okay, we're down to our final two questions. And this question here will lead off with Dr. Cofer. Black trans are often considered amongst the most vulnerable to law enforcement and the general public. How will you aim to protect the Black trans population?
Yeah, this is a question that really weighs heavily on my heart, because when I look at the most vulnerable of the most vulnerable, our Black trans community is within that. They're more likely to be homeless, to experience community violence, and to interact with law enforcement. And so we have a real responsibility to protect the most vulnerable people among us. And they have been abandoned in many ways by our institutions. And so as mayor, one of the things I'd like to do is set a standard for inclusivity that focuses on our humanity and protecting our rights. And so as mayor, in my administration, there will be space for our Black trans community members to have a chance to weigh in on the decisions that we're making on an ongoing basis and how they impact our Black trans community members, making sure that their concerns are centered. Because one of the things we do understand is that when we make decisions without the impacted communities, we often do harm, even if our intentions are good. And so it really is the adage of nothing about us without us. And so we need to be making sure that we're not just focusing from a policy perspective on protections, but also from an actual meaningful inclusion perspective in how those decisions are made in the first place. And that's one of the reasons why in the first 100 to 150 days, I really want to do one important thing, which is change the way we make decisions. I don't want this 5 days. That's the basement. That's not the balcony. That's not where we should be in terms of transparency. We should be in a position where the mayor and the council members and the department chairs are introducing legislation, and then that goes somewhere on our website, organized by topic area, so our community members can see what we're planning to talk about. And then it should go to our boards, committees, and commission members for their advice and input. Why have advisors if you don't ask their advice? And then from there, they should go to the council for a full vote. And that discussion from your advisors should be part of the city council packet, so we know who showed up and said what organizations are in support. It's an opportunity for our unions and our neighborhood associations and our community members and our community organizations to have a voice in our decisions. I want to know where the NAACP stands on something before I vote on it. I want to know where, the various unions stand, and that's our opportunity if we bake in voices for everyone. Thank you.
As the first openly LGBTQ person ever elected in the city of Sacramento, and the first gay person to ever even run for mayor, this hits very close to home. I did a lot of work when I was at Equality California, trying to help our trans community, and what I saw firsthand, not only all the horrible stories about murder and violence against Black trans people, particularly Black trans women, but also the economic disparities, the health disparities, and we've been talking about a lot of this, but for as much as it impacts everyone else, the particular population we're talking about here impacts so much more. On the city council, and now not everything can the city fix, but I fought to make sure that the LGBT Center had a permanent home. And they run mental health programs, they run services, and we opened, because of that, a youth shelter for transition age youth that run away, kicked out of their home, were suffering, so they had a place to be, to get stable. Economic opportunities, particularly for Black trans people, are the most important thing. Helping them get jobs and be employed so they can take care of themselves and not worry about being out, not worrying about how their gender will be perceived by other people. And so I think we really have an opportunity here economically to make sure that we create job programs. And ultimately, if job programs are there that can help uplift Black trans people, their outcomes are going to be so much better. Their lives are going to be so much better. Their families are going to be so much better. And they have suffered so much. That is the basic thing that I think, addition to the healthcare conversation we've had, policing and everything else, we have to focus on making sure that they have what they need to thrive. in not just what we're not doing to hurt them, what are we doing to help them have a strong, stable, economically prosperous future?
You know, our state and our nation has come a long way with LGBT issues in the past 20 years. You know, just the debate 20 years ago, should we allow people to marry, or should we just allow them to have second-class domestic partnerships? You know, we've come a long way. This is an issue with trans people that unfortunately has become a political football across our nation. It's helping win elections for people who want to bring about hate and division in places in our country. Not here in Sacramento, thankfully. So we're going to stand up and acknowledge our people, whoever they are, whoever they want to be. I think the biggest thing that we need to do is acknowledge people exist, acknowledge that there is harm for individuals, and the worst of the worst impacted are Black trans women, and we know this. So the first thing I think is acknowledgement. And every year at the Capitol, we have a ceremony called the Woman of the Year ceremony, where every assembly member picks a woman in their district to be recognized for outstanding work in their community. 5 years ago, I picked the first ever trans woman, a Black trans woman. Her name's Ebony Harper. Granted, she's maybe she's here, she's supporting Dr. Flo for mayor. But I'm good with that. I'm good with Flo, and I'm good with Ebony. It's all good. Just for the record, if she's not here, let her know. So we need to acknowledge people exist. And I will lean in and do just that. Make sure we appoint people to our boards and commissions. Make sure if we have somebody who's a city employee, recognize them. They're not the boogeyman. And also recognize that great harm and great violence comes to this community. Make sure that our first responders, our law enforcement know about the impact of public policy on trans Black women. And so it will be something that I will not shy away from and lean in on city policies to protect everybody in our community, including Black trans women.
Okay, we've come to the end, and I'm going to provide one last statement that each of you will respond to. It's not a set question that you received, and you will not receive 2 minutes. You're going to get 1 minute. I'm going to give you a base statement, and I'm going to say right now, and you respond to it as you see appropriately. Homelessness in Sacramento. We're going to begin in the order of Hansen, McCarty, and Cofer, and I will handle the time right here, and I will lovingly and respectfully cut you off at 1 minute. Mr. Hansen?
Homelessness in Sacramento.
Homelessness in Sacramento.
Homelessness in Sacramento, we've poured tens of millions of dollars and gotten worse and worse outcomes. We have to reset the table, get back to evidence-based solutions, having been, again, homeless as a kid, and helping to start these programs. There are things that work, but our system's too fragmented, too many layers of government, and who's getting lost in the shuffle are the most disadvantaged people on our streets. We can do better in housing them and providing those wraparound services and getting them back on their feet with things that give them dignity again, jobs, housing, and everything else. And it is incumbent on all of us to make that the top priority for our city.
I love the brevity. Assemblyman McCarty?
Yes, it is the number one issue, even though we spent 90 minutes not bringing it up. Everywhere I go, people are saying, why can't we solve this? We are all in this together. A city can't solve it. It's going to be the county, the federal, the state. It's going to be community partners like the NAACP. We need to look for solutions focusing on the urgency today. We can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We need to focus on emergency shelter sites, like tiny homes at Cal Expo, which I'm working to deliver through my legislation, but there's too many hurdles. What I would do at City Council, every Tuesday night, I would agendize this issue at 5 o'clock. Because too often we focus on all the other things that hope this issue just goes away. So I think we need to clear our sidewalks so my kids can go home from McClatchy High School and not have to walk in the street. But also, we gotta tell people where they can go, not where they can't go. Whether it's places they can legally camp, legally park their car, shelter places they can go. We need to focus on permanent supportive housing, but triage the emergency today and help get people off the streets. It's the albatross surrounding all of our collective necks.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Dr. Cofer.
Homelessness in Sacramento is not an official priority of our city, but it should be. And so the other thing that I'm going to do in the first 100 days is set priorities, because it is impossible to solve a problem that you have neither named nor set goals to solve. And it's also impossible for our community to hold you accountable for where those millions of dollars have gone if you haven't told us what you set out to do, and we can't say whether you did it or not. So we need safe ground. We need places where people can go immediately, where they can have bathrooms and showers and laundry and trash and power to charge their cell phones and a safe place to sleep. Because I agree, we cannot continue to tell people where they can't be until we've told them where they can be. We need to create more long-term supportive housing with the existing buildings, the hotels and motels that are small businesses that would love to have a long-term lease to be able to stabilize their income, and where we could put families with kids and childcare, or where we could also put our elders with supportive services. And we also need a plan to keep people in their homes.
Thank you, Dr. Cofer. Thank you very much. Would you all please give a round of applause for all of the candidates? With that, I will also say that we look forward to your service of Sacramento, whether that be as an elected mayor or whether that be in any other service you continue to provide should you not get elected to this office. We want you all to know that we're here to ensure that the African American community's voice is heard and that all people of color's voice is heard. We want to make sure that whoever is elected here in Sacramento brings forth the full force of the people, not of who paid them, not of their personal influence, not of anything other than improving the outcomes for this city for all people.